The desert air was still cold when the convoy rolled out of Forward Operating Base Jackson. The horizon shimmered with the promise of heat, but for now, it was the kind of crisp warning soldiers both loved and feared. Clear skies meant visibility, and visibility meant exposure. Sergeant Riley Halley sat in the back of the last MRAP, her M2010 sniper rifle secured across her lap, listening to the rhythmic thump of the engine beneath her boots. To anyone glancing her way, she looked calm, maybe too calm. But beneath that exterior, her mind was already mapping distances, elevations, wind directions. She was built for calculation, not conversation. The mission briefing had called this operation low risk. The objective: extract a captured local informant believed to hold coordinates to a new Taliban weapons route in the northeastern Kunar province. The SEALs were leading the raid. Hale's sniper team would provide overwatch from an elevated ridge to the west. Simple, clean, supposedly safe. But Halley didn't believe in safe, not here. Not in this valley. She'd been deployed long enough to know that the word routine in Afghanistan meant someone forgot something important. And when something was forgotten, people died. She shifted slightly, catching a glimpse of the man sitting across from her, Chief Petty Officer Mason Kearns, the SEAL team lead. Square-jawed, confident, wearing the smirk of someone who'd been through hell and walked out bored. He caught her glance, lifted a brow. "First joint op with us?" he asked over the engine noise. "First one that's classified as easy," she replied without looking up. He chuckled. "Don't worry, we'll keep it that way." Halley didn't answer. Her silence wasn't arrogance. It was precision. She spoke when data mattered, not when banter filled the air. The convoy slowed as they approached the insertion point, a barren stretch of sand and rock that looked like the end of the world. The mountains towered ahead, jagged and cruel, slicing the sky like a broken knife. Helicopters circled above, kicking up dust clouds that turned the sunlight gold. Halley shielded her face with a scarf, feeling the sting of grit against her skin. The platoon disembarked, forming into their respective units. The SEALs would push into the valley on foot, sweeping the small compound near the river. Halley and her spotter, Corporal Tom Jenkins, would scale the western ridge, 1 mile out, 1,800 feet up. From there, they'd have a clean line of sight over the entire valley floor. It sounded like textbook Overwatch. But nothing about this place felt textbook. As she and Jenkins started the climb, Hale's senses sharpened. The silence was wrong. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, watching kind. Even the wind moved strange, whispering through the rocks like it carried secrets. Halfway up, Jenkins paused to catch his breath, sweat already cutting trails down his dirt-streaked face. "Man, I swear you were born for this," he panted. Halley just kept moving. "Wind's picking up. Stay low. We'll set the hide behind that shale shelf." She reached the ridge first, lying flat and crawling the final feet until the world opened below her scope. From up there, the valley looked deceptively calm, a watercolor of tan and gray, dotted with clusters of clay huts and dusty fields. Through her spotting scope, she scanned every rooftop, every tree line, every shadow. Patterns emerged, too many dark spots where movement should have been. No children playing. No livestock near the huts. A kind of absence that told a story. She keyed her radio. Overwatch in position. Visibility, 1 mile. Wind 8 knots east. No immediate contact, but something's off. Locals cleared out early. Command responded with the monotone professionalism of men far away from the field. "Copy, Sergeant. Maintain observation." Jenkins adjusted his rangefinder beside her, muttering, "Always the same." They never listen until it's too late. Halley didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the scope. Movement flickered near a cluster of rocks southeast, too controlled to be farmers. She zoomed in. 4 figures crouched, passing something metallic between them. She adjusted the focus. The glint confirmed it. A rifle barrel. Her stomach nodded. Command, be advised. Multiple hostiles spotted southeast sector. Grid coordinates 7-3-9er 221, she reported. Possible ambush set up. Silence crackled over the comms for a few seconds before the operator replied, almost dismissively. Copy, Sergeant. Local intel says that area's clear. Probably villagers. Halle exhaled slowly. Villagers didn't carry PKMs and wear matching scarves. But she'd learned long ago that arguing through radio only wasted time. She kept watching. The SEAL team below was advancing down the valley floor, completely exposed, framed by walls of rock that would make perfect kill zones. Her pulse quickened. The men in the rocks were moving now, taking positions along a ridgeline opposite her. One lifted a radio. Another set down a large canvas bag. Hale's training clicked like a switch. She knew what was coming before it happened. She whispered. Under her breath, "Oh no. No, no." The explosion hit like the sky split open. A blinding flash tore through the valley, followed by the rolling thunder of an IED detonation. The lead SEAL truck lifted off the ground, flipping sideways before crashing in a burst of flame. Echoes slammed through the canyon walls, rattling the ridge beneath her elbows. Jenkins cursed, yanking his headset off. Jesus, that's them. They're hit. Hale's scope danced as smoke filled her view. Through the haze, she saw figures scrambling, SEALs trying to drag the wounded to cover. Bullets began to snap through the air. The sound was distinct. Heavy machine gun fire, multiple sources. Command, this is Ridge 1. Howell shouted into her mic. SEAL unit is under attack. Heavy contact. Grid 7-3-9-2-2-1. Requesting immediate air support. Static. Nothing. She switched channels, screaming into the backup frequency. Still nothing but static and chaos. Jenkins pointed downslope. They're cut off. No retreat path. They're boxed in. Halle slammed her magazine into place, her hands moving automatically now. We're up. Through her scope, she saw one of the SEALs pinned behind a broken wall, firing blindly toward the ridge. A burst of gunfire cut him down mid-movement. Another man sprinted into the open, dragging him back. The enemy was closing in fast, shifting positions with deadly coordination. Jenkins called out range data between gasps. 800 meters, right side ridge. 2 tangos advancing. Halle adjusted her windage, drew a long breath, and squeezed. Crack. The first shot cut clean through one insurgent's shoulder. The second shot dropped another before he could reach the truck wreck. The recoil echoed through the stone like thunder rolling over the dead. Jenkins gave a tight nod. You just bought them 30 seconds. But 30 seconds wasn't enough. Hale's jaw tightened. The SEALs were shouting over comms, voices overlapping in panic. Their support bird was grounded. Too much smoke, no visibility. She switched channels again, her voice like ice. Command, this is Sergeant Halle. SEAL unit is compromised. I repeat, compromised. We are engaging from Overwatch. You need to get them extraction now. A hiss of feedback. Then finally, a voice. Calm, professional, but tense. Ridge 1, acknowledge. Stand by for air support. Who's covering the SEALs right now? Hale's reply was sharp, cold, and steady. I am. She shifted her body, aligning her scope with a new set of hostiles flanking from the east. The sunlight caught her cheek as she pressed the trigger again. 1 shot, 1 kill. Below, chaos reigned. But on that ridge, one woman had become the difference between survival and annihilation. The mission that was supposed to be easy had just turned into a bloodbath. And Sergeant Riley Halle was the only thing standing between the SEALs and a headline none of them wanted to write. As the smoke swallowed the valley, she whispered into her radio, half prayer, half promise. "Hang on, boys. I've got you covered." Smoke boiled up from the valley like a black storm cloud, blotting out the morning sun. The smell of burning fuel and metal rolled across the rocks. Halle could taste it sharp, chemical, mixed with dust and blood. Through her scope, she saw shapes moving inside the chaos. SEALs dragging the wounded, trying to regroup behind the wrecked truck. Their formation had shattered in seconds. What had been a clean line of advance was now a cluster of desperate men surrounded on three sides. Halle adjusted her focus. Beyond the valley, faint flashes danced in the haze enemy muzzle fire from multiple positions. She counted at least 20 rifles, maybe more. The Taliban fighters had the high ground on both flanks, perfect crossfire. Whoever planned the ambush knew exactly how to trap Americans. "Jenkins, how's your shoulder?" she asked. He winced, but lifted the rangefinder. "Bad, but not dead. Wind steady from the east, 6 knots. Good. Keep feeding me range. We can't miss today." She settled behind the rifle. Her breathing slowed until everything else faded. The wind, the shouting, even the pain in her knees from hours on stone. In the glass of her scope, she found a shooter braced behind a rock ledge. 800 meters. Elevation -20. Exhale. Crack. The man's body jerked backward, disappearing in dust. "Hit confirmed," Jenkins muttered. "Next one," Halle said, scanning left. She saw another muzzle flash, a second target running to replace the first. Crack. Another fall. But for every enemy she dropped, 2 more appeared. The valley swarmed like an anthill torn open. She switched channels again. "Command, this is Ridge 1. Multiple hostiles on both sides of the valley. Requesting immediate drone overwatch." Static. Then a voice strained, half drowned in background noise. "Negative on drone support, weather interference. Keep visual coverage." "Visual coverage," she whispered bitterly. "Copy that." The SEALs below were still pinned. Halle could see Chief Kearns crouched behind the burned-out truck, shouting into his radio. 2 men beside him were motionless, one clearly gone. Another clutched his thigh, blood spreading across his camo. "They're going to get overrun," Jenkins said quietly. "Not while I'm breathing." Halle pulled back from the scope, scanned the terrain with her naked eyes. The ridge opposite hers, the one with the firing nests, was steeper than it looked, a maze of loose shale and jagged edges. But one particular rock cluster near the center kept drawing her attention. She'd seen faint movement there even before the explosion. Something about it was too clean, too deliberate. She lifted her binoculars and zoomed. Under a camouflage tarp lay a long, narrow object, tripod-mounted, barrel glinting in the sun. "Oh, hell," she muttered. "They've got a PKM heavy." Jenkins cursed. "They'll chew the SEALs apart, not if we get them first." She recalibrated her scope. Wind shifted tiny dust devils twisting across the ridge. The shot would be long, maybe 1,200 meters, and the target was partially obscured. Any sniper school would call it low percentage. But Halle wasn't textbook anymore. "Hold your breath, Jenkins," she said softly. She lined up the reticle, felt her heartbeat sinking with the trigger pull 1-2 break. The shot cracked like thunder. Through the lens, she watched the gunner slump sideways, his body rolling down the rocks. The PKM tumbled with him, clattering uselessly against the stone. "Gun nest down," she reported. Jenkins let out a shaky laugh. "You just saved every man down there." For a brief moment, hope flickered. The SEALs pushed forward, using the lull to drag their wounded toward a small walled compound. Halle tracked them, calling in coordinates as they moved. But then, in the distance, another flash caught her eye, this one brighter, wider. A mortar tube. Oh no. She screamed into her mic. Command. Mortar position North Ridge. Get your birds in the air now. Too late. The first round whistled down and slammed into the far end of the valley, a shockwave punching through her chest. The next landed closer right between the SEAL positions. Dirt and debris erupted skyward. Hawley threw her arm over Jenkins as fragments rained against their rock cover. Jenkins, talk to me. I'm good mostly. He grinned weakly, blood running from his temple. They're bracketing us. They'll zero the ridge next. She knew he was right. Once the enemy realized where her shots were coming from, they'd target her next. But leaving the SEALs uncovered wasn't an option. Hand me the second rifle, she ordered. He blinked. The spare? You planning on dual wielding? Something like that. She took the backup M4, set it beside her sniper rifle. One for close defense, one for overwatch. Her movements were methodical, almost mechanical. Fear didn't fit anywhere inside her focus. It was replaced by pure math and motion. The third mortar round hit closer still, scattering shards across the ledge. Hawley didn't flinch. Through her scope, she saw the mortar crew reloading. She dialed for distance, adjusted for wind, and fired. Crack. The loader fell. The tube wobbled. Another round half-seated exploded prematurely, vaporizing the remaining crew in a burst of fire. A new silence rippled across the ridge, a deadly pause where even the birds had fled. Jenkins whispered, "They're backing off." "You did it." "Not yet." Below, Hawley saw movement again. The SEALs had reached the compound, but one man lagged behind carrying another on his shoulders, staggering under the weight. Enemy fighters spotted them and opened fire. The rescuer stumbled, hit in the leg. Hawley didn't think, didn't breathe. She fired 3 times in succession, 1, 2, 3, and each round found its mark. The path cleared. The wounded SEAL crawled behind a low wall, pulling his buddy to safety. Her radio came alive suddenly with Command's frantic voice. "Ridge 1, confirm your status." "Who's covering the Navy SEALs?" She keyed the mic, her tone even, controlled, like nothing around her burned. "Sniper Hawley, Ridge 1. I've got eyes. They're not dying today." For a heartbeat, the entire net went quiet. And a new voice joined the SEAL commander himself. "Copy that, Sergeant Hawley. You keep them alive. We're bringing the cavalry." "Roger that, sir," she said. "Just hurry." The enemy wasn't finished. Reinforcements were arriving, dozens more pouring down from the northern pass, shrouded in smoke. They were organized, disciplined, moving in coordinated waves. Whoever led them was no amateur. Jenkins coughed. "That's too many. Even for you." Hawley glanced at him, eyes steady. "Then we don't miss." She changed her firing position, rolling to a new angle so the enemy couldn't triangulate her. Bullets cracked over her head, showering rock fragments. She ignored them, working the bolt, firing, moving again. Her world shrank to the circle of her scope, the faint blur of heat, the rise and fall of targets, the measured rhythm of precision and purpose. Somewhere deep in her mind, she remembered her first day at sniper school, the instructor saying, "Patience and pulse. 1 heartbeat, 1 shot." Back then, the other trainees had laughed when they saw a woman among them. Not anymore. The firefight stretched past the hour mark. Command tried twice to get a chopper in, but crosswinds forced them back. The SEALs were still pinned. Ammo was running low. Hale's rifle barrel burned hot. Jenkins's voice was fading, his breathing shallow. She reached over and pressed a hand to his wound. "Stay with me, Corporal." He nodded weakly. Just don't let him climb up here. I won't. Her headset crackled again. Ridge 1 QRF en route ETA 40 minutes. Can you hold? She glanced at her half-empty ammo pouch, then at the valley where the SEALs still fought for their lives. We'll hold, she said simply. She reloaded, wiped the sweat from her brow, and lay back behind the rifle. Her hands were trembling now, not from fear, but exhaustion and adrenaline colliding inside her veins. She focused on the scope again, whispering to herself like a mantra. Breathe in. Exhale, steady. Through the lens, the enemy lines blurred and sharpened again. She counted targets, shifted aim, adjusted wind. She'd already fired more rounds in this one engagement than in her entire previous deployment, but she wasn't done. The valley roared beneath her, yet inside that chaos, Riley Halley found stillness. The ridge was hers now, a narrow strip of rock, 1,000 feet of drop, and the unspoken promise that she would not leave those men behind. She whispered into her radio, voice calm as midnight. Ridge 1 holding. Tell those SEALs they're not alone. And then she fired again. The valley had become hell. Smoke hung so thick that the horizon disappeared, swallowed by fire and dust. Every few seconds, a new sound cut through the haze. The metallic ping of ricocheted bullets, the echo of shouted orders, or the dull thud of another explosion. The once calm mountain pass now pulsed like a living thing, one that wanted everyone inside it dead. Hawley wiped the grit from her eyes, blinking against the wind that carried sand and smoke across her scope. Below, the SEAL team had managed to regroup inside the mud brick compound, but they were cornered. The outer wall was half collapsed, and enemies were tightening their circle. The radio hissed to life. Ridge 1, this is Kearns. We're boxed in, east walls compromised. Can you see their sniper? She scanned quickly. There, just below the ridge line opposite hers, a faint shimmer of glass. I see him, she said, exhaling slowly. 2 seconds. Her finger brushed the trigger, crack. The enemy sniper fell backward, his scope glinting one last time before disappearing into the dirt. Target down, Halley said. Good shot, Kearns replied, voice ragged. You just saved my right flank. She wanted to tell him it was nothing, that she was only doing her job, but there wasn't time. Jenkins groaned beside her, clutching his shoulder. The bleeding hadn't stopped. His face had gone pale under a thin sheen of sweat. Stay with me, she told him, tearing a strip of fabric from her sleeve and pressing it against the wound. He forced a smirk. You're terrible at small talk, you know that? Lucky for you, I'm better at shooting. A burst of machine gun fire interrupted them, spraying rock fragments over their position. The ridge shook, peppering them with dust. Halley ducked instinctively, then rose again, scanning through the scope. They're trying to suppress me, she muttered. Means they finally figured out where I am. Good, Jenkins said weakly. Means you're doing your job too well. More figures appeared below, darting between rocks and shadows. They were closing in from 3 directions now, a coordinated assault. She could see it in their movement. This wasn't chaos anymore. It was strategy. Someone down there was giving orders. She toggled her radio. Command, Ridge 1. We're taking heavy return fire from multiple ridges. SEALs still pinned. We're engaging but losing visibility. Ridge 1. Roger that, Command replied. QRF still inbound, ETA 35 minutes. 35 minutes. It might as well have been forever. A round slammed into the rock inches from her face, the concussion rattling her teeth. Halley rolled sideways, dragging Jenkins behind a boulder. Jenkins, how many mags left? He checked his pack with trembling hands. 3 full, 1 half. Split them, she said. You cover close range if they climb. I'll handle long. He frowned. "Riley, you can't shoot and bandage me at the same time." She gave him a rare grin. "Then don't get hit again." He laughed, a dry, pained sound, but it gave her something she hadn't realized she'd lost. Focus. She returned to her rifle and scanned the horizon again. Every enemy she saw, she marked, calculated, and dropped. Each shot was a small act of defiance, a refusal to yield. Her breathing matched the rhythm of her shots, slow, mechanical, precise. But no matter how fast she worked, the enemy kept coming. Minutes blurred into hours. Her muscles cramped, her throat burned from dehydration, and the rifle's barrel glowed faintly from the heat of sustained fire. She lost track of how many rounds she'd fired. At one point, she saw a young enemy fighter crawling through the dust, barely more than a teenager. His rifle was too big for him. He hesitated before aiming, just a flicker of fear. Hale's finger froze. For a heartbeat, she saw his eyes through the scope. Wide, terrified, human. Then a round from somewhere else struck near her, snapping her back into instinct. She fired. The boy dropped. Her hands trembled after that shot. Jenkins must have noticed because he whispered, "You did what you had to." "I know," she said quietly. "I just wish I didn't." Below, the SEALs were running low on ammo. She could hear Kearns on the comm shouting coordinates, trying to call in mortar support that wasn't coming. Every channel buzzed with overlapping transmissions. Chaos layered on chaos. Then, through it all, came one voice, sharp, authoritative, the field commander at IFB Jackson. All units, were losing signal on the SEAL frequency. Who's covering the Navy SEALs? For a moment, silence. Then Hawley keyed her mic. "Ridge 1, Sergeant Riley Hawley. I've got them." Her voice was steady, flat, utterly calm. It cut through the radio static like a blade. "Say again, Ridge 1." "I said I've got eyes on them, sir. I'm covering the SEALs." In the command tent, the room fell silent. Every operator turned toward the speaker. The voice didn't match the chaos. It was the voice of someone who wasn't panicking, who was in complete control. "Understood, Sergeant," came the reply finally. "You're cleared for full engagement. Do what you have to." "Copy that," she said. From that moment, the operation wasn't in command's hands anymore. It was in hers. Hawley shifted to a new angle, her cheek pressed against the rifle stock. Through her scope, she watched the battlefield unfold like a chessboard. Every movement, every flicker of shadow became part of her calculation. She no longer saw dozens of enemies. She saw patterns, arcs of motion she could predict and intercept. Her shots became rhythm. Crack, move, crack, reload, crack, below. The SEALs began moving again, following her callouts. She guided them through the chaos, using bursts of fire to herd the enemy's focus away. 2 tangos, left ridge, suppressed, move north. "Copy, Ridge 1, came Kearns's reply. "We're moving." The coordination between sniper and ground unit became seamless, a wordless dance of survival. Then, for a fleeting moment, the valley quieted. A gunfire faded into distant echoes. "Maybe they're retreating," Jenkins murmured hopefully. Hawley didn't buy it. "No, they're repositioning." Her instincts were right. Through the scope, she saw shapes emerging from behind the ridge, heavier silhouettes, carrying longer weapons, RPGs. "Oh, they're bringing rockets now," she whispered grimly. She adjusted, sighted the first rocketeer, and fired before he could shoulder the launcher. A second took his place. Another shot. Then another. She dropped them all, one after the other. But for every one she killed, 2 more arrived. A sudden blast rocked the ridge, knocking her backward. The explosion came from below, one of the RPGs hitting just beneath their position. Rocks tumbled. Shrapnel whistled through the air. Hale's ears rang. Jenkins was shouting, but she couldn't hear the words. Her hand pressed instinctively to her side. Wet warmth. Not deep, but bleeding. She cursed, pressing down with her scarf. Through the haze of pain, she crawled back to her rifle. The world was spinning, her vision tunneling, but she locked back onto the scope anyway. Down in the valley, the seals were still alive, barely. She could see Kearns rallying them behind the wall, his weapon jammed, using hand signals to direct fire. The sight lit a spark in her. Pain faded. Everything faded. She whispered under her breath, "You're not dying on my watch." The next few minutes blurred into instinct and motion. Her mind detached, her body on autopilot. She worked the bolt, fired, shifted, fired again. Her world shrank to a single mantra. Hold the line. Protect them. And somehow, miraculously, it worked. The enemy fire slowed, then faltered. The last RPG team fell silent. Through her scope, she saw retreating shapes, thin, ragged figures melting back into the mountain passes. Silence fell, heavy and surreal. For the first time in hours, Holly lowered her rifle. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably now. Jenkins was half-conscious beside her, mumbling something she couldn't make out. She keyed her radio, voice hoarse but steady. "Command, Ridge 1. Enemy fallback confirmed. Seals alive. We're still holding." The reply came a moment later, full of disbelief. "Copy that, Ridge 1. Copy. Good work, Sergeant. Reinforcements inbound. Hold your position." She leaned her head back against the stone, letting the wind whip through her hair. Down below, she saw the seals pulling their wounded into cover, waving faintly toward the ridge. A silent thank you across the smoke. Holly nodded once, unseen, and whispered, "You're welcome." The storm had passed, but the valley still reeked of smoke and gunpowder. The silence that followed felt unnatural, the kind of quiet that only exists after everything living has either escaped or died. Sergeant Riley Holly lay flat against the rocky ground, her cheek pressed to the rifle stock. She hadn't realized how numb her hands had become until she tried to reload, and the magazine slipped from her fingers. Her pulse thudded in her ears, her vision blurring slightly. "Jenkins," she said softly, "you still with me?" A weak chuckle came from behind her. "Barely. But I'm not letting you take all the credit." "Good," she whispered, managing a smile. Down below, the SEAL team was regrouping, battered, bloodied, but alive. They were moving with that careful precision of men who had danced too close to death and didn't quite trust their luck yet. Her radio crackled again. "Ridge 1, this is command. QRF approaching from West Ridge. Confirm visual." She turned her scope toward the western horizon. Dust clouds in the distance, armored trucks kicking up plumes of earth as they sped through the valley trail. "Visual confirmed," she said. "Friendly convoy inbound, 5 clicks out." "Copy that, Ridge 1. Sit tight. We're patching Command Chief into your channel." Static. Then a new voice, deep, controlled, the kind that came with stars on a shoulder. "Sergeant Holly, this is Colonel Briggs. I'm told you've been coordinating sniper coverage for the SEAL team?" "Yes, sir," she replied. "Your transmission earlier. I've got them. That was you?" "Yes, sir." There was a pause, the sound of faint typing and murmuring in the background. Then Briggs said, "That transmission's been replayed here a dozen times already. Half the ops room thought we were listening to a machine. You sounded unshakable." "I didn't have time to shake, sir," she said simply. Jenkins chuckled weakly beside her. "Nice one, Holly. They'll print that on a t-shirt someday." Briggs continued, we've got medevac on standby. You and your spotter will be lifted first once the QRF secures your position. SEALs will follow. Understood, sir. We'll hold until they arrive. But as she watched the convoy closing in, something about the movement of the dust trails didn't sit right. It was too spread out, not in tight formation. Her instincts prickled. Command, Ridge 1, she said, adjusting her scope. Recommend convoy halt immediately. I've got heat signatures, multiple, flanking their path from both sides. There was a brief silence. Ridge 1, confirm. You're calling enemy presence near the QRF route? Confirm. 10+ hostiles on the left slope, maybe more on the right. Ambush positioning. If they drive another 50 meters, they're dead. The radio went silent again. She could almost hear the disbelief through the static. Ridge 1, you have eyes on? Crystal clear, sir. Permission to engage? Granted. Take your shots. Without hesitation, she steadied her rifle and exhaled. Crack. One hostile down. Crack. Second. Third. The ambush line erupted into chaos. Below, the convoy halted immediately. Soldiers poured out, taking cover as her precision fire cleared the flanks. The radio came alive again, with voices shouting confirmations. Ridge 1 just saved our lead truck. Left ridge neutralized. Who the hell's on that scope? She ignored it all and kept firing until her last magazine clicked empty. Jenkins, last mag, she said, reaching back without turning. He handed it over, his hand trembling. You're not human, you know that? Not today, she replied, locking it in. 10 minutes later, the QRF reached her position. Dust and diesel fumes filled the air as armored boots crunched over rock. A medic rushed to Jenkins first, wrapping his wound before loading him onto a stretcher. Sniper? One of the Marines called out, looking around. Here, Halle said, standing slowly. Her knees nearly buckled, but she stayed upright. The Marine blinked in surprise when he realized who he was talking to, not some burly marksman, but a young woman, blood on her sleeve, eyes steady as stone. You're the one covering the SEALs? He asked. She just nodded. Let's move. As the convoy escorted them down the ridge, the scale of destruction became clearer. Dozens of spent shell casings glittered in the sunlight around her position. Below, bodies, both enemy and friendly, dotted the sand. The SEALs, still covered in dust and grime, saluted her as she passed. Kearns, the SEAL commander, limped over, offering a battered handshake. You kept us alive up there, he said. Just did my job? Halle replied quietly. Yeah, he said with a faint grin. But not everyone's job gets recorded in legend. By the time the convoy reached the extraction zone, the sun was sinking behind the mountains. Medevac choppers circled overhead, kicking up whirlwinds of sand. Halle shielded her eyes as one descended. As she helped Jenkins aboard, Colonel Briggs's voice returned on the radio. Ridge 1, I've just received confirmation from the SEAL CO. They're crediting you for saving 9 lives. That makes your voice from the ridge one of the most replayed transmissions in the last 24 hours. She didn't know how to respond to that. Praise felt out of place here, surrounded by smoke and death. Just happy they're going home, sir, she said. So are we, Sergeant. So are we. The chopper lifted off. As it rose, she looked down at the battlefield, the smoking ridges, the torn earth, the quiet forms lying still among the rocks. She wondered how many times this same scene had played out in history. Nameless people doing their duty, no one ever knowing the sound of their voice. When they landed at the forward base, night had fallen. Floodlights bathed the camp in sterile white. Halle climbed out, legs unsteady, eyes burning from fatigue. A crowd had gathered near the operations tent, medics, mechanics, and soldiers who had heard the broadcast. Someone pointed. "That's her," a voice whispered. "That's the one from the ridge." She ignored it, heading straight to the field medic's station. Jenkins was already being treated, grinning doppily under morphine. "You still owe me coffee," he muttered. "I'll make it extra bitter," she said softly, brushing dust from his forehead. Behind her, Colonel Briggs approached, tall, silver-haired, wearing a uniform too clean for the front. "Sergeant Hawley," he said, extending his hand. "You saved 2 units today. I don't hand out compliments easily, but you've earned one." She shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, sir." "Your voice," he added, studying her. "Calm under fire, calling plays like you were reading from a script. You ever think about leadership roles?" She blinked. "Sir, I'm just a sniper." Briggs smiled. "No, you're something rarer, someone who makes people believe they can survive." The words hung in the air. For the first time, Hawley didn't know what to say. As he walked away, she looked toward the open desert, where distant fires still glowed red against the black horizon. She'd thought this mission would be just another operation, a day, a ridge, a fight. But it had become something else, a turning point. Not just for her, but for every woman who had ever been told she didn't belong behind a rifle, on a ridge or in the line of fire. She turned her gaze upward, to the stars just beginning to appear through the haze. The world below was chaos, but up there silence. For the first time in days, she let herself breathe. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring new orders, new battles, new doubts. But tonight, the valley was quiet. And in that quiet, the legend of the voice from the ridge began to take root. By morning, the desert was quiet again, unnervingly so. The smell of smoke still clung to the air at Forward Operating Base Jackson, mingling with the bitter scent of coffee and diesel. The base was in motion, helicopters lifting off, convoys heading out, medics running triage on the wounded. Sergeant Riley Hawley sat on a low crate near the com's tent, her rifle stripped and cleaned, the barrel gleaming in the early light. Her uniform was freshly laundered, but the dust never really left. It seemed burned into her skin. She hadn't slept. Not really. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of the valley, the boy with the oversized rifle, the SEAL team pinned behind the crumbling wall, the voice on the radio calling out for cover, and her own voice answering. "Ridge 1, I've got them." Those 4 words had already traveled farther than she could imagine. She learned about it first from Jenkins, who was sitting beside her, arm in a sling, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "You made the news," he said, holding up a tablet. She frowned. "The news?" He handed it to her. The screen showed a grainy photo, her silhouette atop the ridge, captured by SEAL's helmet cam. The headline read, "Unknown female sniper saves Navy SEAL team in Afghanistan. Command calls her." The voice from the ridge. Hawley stared at the image for a long moment. It didn't even look like her. The camera had caught her mid-shot, her hair whipping in the wind, body framed by smoke and sunlight. "They're calling you a hero," Jenkins said. "Social media's losing its mind. Congress is already asking command for your name." She set the tablet down carefully. "I didn't do it for that." "I know," Jenkins said softly. "But people need heroes, Hawley, and right now you're theirs." Before she could reply, a soldier approached. "Sergeant Hawley, Colonel Briggs wants to see you. Now." She followed him across the base to the command tent. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with restrained chaos. Officers on headsets, intelligence maps glowing with digital overlays, and a massive monitor showing live footage from various units. Briggs stood near the center, his expression unreadable. "Sergeant," he said, gesturing her closer. "You've become quite the headline." "I didn't ask to be, sir," she said. I know, Briggs said. But the thing about fame in wartime is that it doesn't ask permission. He handed her a folder. Inside were printed transcripts of radio exchanges, her name highlighted in multiple sections. The Pentagon's already received media inquiries. They're debating whether to officially confirm your identity or keep it classified. I'd prefer classified, Halle said quickly. Briggs studied her for a moment. That's what I thought you'd say. He lowered his voice. But the higher-ups might not agree. They think showcasing a female sniper, a calm, steady voice saving elite operators, sends a message. A good one? Halle clenched her jaw. A message built on what, sir? The bodies we left behind? Briggs sighed. I know what you're feeling. But sometimes a story like yours helps people believe there's purpose in all this chaos. She looked at the ground. And what if there isn't? He didn't answer. Later that day, a helicopter carried her and Jenkins to the main base at Bagram for debriefing. The airfield was alive with noise, engines roaring, reporters swarming outside the gates, flashes from cameras catching in the dust. As Halle stepped out, a crowd of soldiers lined the edge of the tarmac. Some clapped, others saluted. She didn't know where to look. Inside the debriefing room, a dozen officials waited. Officers, intelligence analysts, even a civilian representative from the Defense Department's PR branch. They asked her to recount every detail. How she'd spotted the ambush, how she'd coordinated with the SEALs, what she'd felt when command asked, "Who's covering the Navy SEALs?" She told them everything, clinically, without embellishment. Her voice was steady, her words stripped of drama. When she finished, there was a brief silence. Then one of the civilians leaned forward. Sergeant Halle, do you realize what your story means to people back home? A female sniper holding the line alone, saving America's most elite warriors. It's the kind of symbol people rally around. I wasn't trying to be a symbol, she said. But you are, he replied. And whether you like it or not, the world knows your voice. That night, when she finally returned to her quarters, she found a stack of letters waiting, handwritten, some from strangers, others from soldiers she'd never met. One read, "My daughter says she wants to be like the sniper lady from the news. Thank you for giving her someone to look up to." Another said, "My husband was one of the SEALs you saved. You don't know me, but I owe you my world." She sat there for a long time, the letters spread out across her cot. It should have felt good. Instead, it felt heavy, like every word added another ounce to a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. Outside, the base hummed with nighttime life. Generators throbbed. Laughter drifted from the mess hall. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had shifted, that she'd left part of herself on that ridge. A soft knock broke her thoughts. Jenkins stepped in, still pale, but walking now. "Can't sleep?" "Not really," she admitted. He sat down beside her. "You ever think about what happens after? When you go home?" She shrugged. "If I go home?" "You will," he said firmly. "They'll probably stick you in D.C. to give speeches and sign autographs." She smiled faintly. "That's not me." "Maybe not," he said, "but maybe that's what they need you to be." She looked at him, her expression tired but sharp. "You know what I need, Jenkins?" "What?" "To stop being a story." He nodded slowly. Too late for that. The next morning, she was called to the base auditorium. A crowd filled the seats, soldiers, officers, journalists, and cameras. On stage, a banner read, "Recognition Ceremony, Operation Ridge Shield." When they called her name, applause thundered through the hall. Halle walked across the stage, spine straight, face unreadable. Colonel Briggs handed her a medal, the Silver Star. As flashbulbs exploded around her, she caught his eye. He mouthed the words, "You earned this." Afterward, as she stood outside, the reporters swarmed closer, shouting questions. "Sergeant Hale, how does it feel to be America's first female sniper hero? What was going through your mind when you said, 'I've got them'? Do you think this will inspire more women to join the military?" She didn't answer any of them. She just kept walking. When she finally reached the edge of the runway, she stopped and looked out at the mountains, dark silhouettes against the setting sun. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the metal of her rifle, and she whispered, "You were never supposed to be famous." The wind carried her words away. Back in the States, the headlines spread faster than wildfire. News anchors repeated her call sign. Morning shows ran interviews with her former instructors. Documentaries called her the voice from the ridge. But for Hale, it didn't feel like victory. Every photo, every interview request was a reminder of smoke, of screams, of the weight of a trigger. She'd saved lives, yes, but she'd also taken them. And as the world cheered her name, Riley Hale began to wonder whether they would still cheer if they understood what it truly cost to be the voice. The flight home was quiet. Sergeant Riley Hale sat by the window, watching the clouds pass beneath her like drifting ghosts. Somewhere over the Atlantic, she caught her reflection in the glass, pale, distant, unfamiliar. Her dress uniform felt too clean, too crisp for someone who'd lived through dirt and blood. Jenkins sat across the aisle, half dozing under a blanket. His sling was gone, replaced by a neat bandage on his shoulder. He joked earlier that the military would probably name a training exercise after her before they'd let him retire. She'd smiled, but it hadn't reached her eyes. When the plane touched down at Andrews Air Force Base, a crowd was already waiting. Cameras flashed as the doors opened. Flags waved. A brass band played something triumphant. As Hale stepped onto the tarmac, the sound hit her like a wave. Cheering, chanting, applause. She froze for a moment, the noise disorienting. A man in a suit approached, a Pentagon press officer. "Sergeant Hale, welcome home. The secretary will be meeting you shortly. We've arranged transport to the ceremony in D.C. She nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." Every move from that point on felt choreographed. Cameras followed her through hallways. Reporters shouted questions. Every time she looked up, someone was watching, smiling, applauding, waiting for her to say something inspiring. But Hale didn't have speeches. She had flashes, the sound of gunfire echoing in her skull, the smell of burning metal, the sight of a teenage boy's terrified eyes before her rifle cracked. They called her the voice from the ridge. To them, it was heroic. To her, it was a sound she could never unhear. A hero's welcome Washington, D.C. glowed like a jewel that night, polished marble, bright lights, banners hung with her name. In the middle of it all, Hale stood under chandeliers that reflected like stars. She'd been given a hotel suite overlooking the Capitol dome, but she hadn't even unpacked. At the Pentagon ceremony, the Secretary of Defense shook her hand while cameras rolled. "You remind us that courage has no gender," he said. "The nation is proud of you." Applause erupted. She smiled on cue, the way they told her to. When it was over, she slipped away from the crowd, out onto a balcony overlooking the Potomac. The night air was cool, but the city hummed. Cars, lights, endless motion. Jenkins found her there. He had traded his fatigues for a dark suit that looked borrowed. "You should be inside," he said. "They're talking about sending you on a media tour." She didn't look at him. "I don't want a tour." He leaned on the railing beside her. "Then tell them no." "They'll say it's my duty," she said quietly. Jenkins sighed. "You saved lives, Hale. You earned the right to disappear if that's what you want." Her eyes flicked toward him. "You ever wonder if we were lucky or just slower to die?" He didn't answer. The question didn't need one. The cost of fame the following weeks blurred together. Talk shows, interviews, news specials. Every time she opened her mouth, the producers wanted her to say something cinematic. They played her transmission clip on loop. Ridge one. I've got them. Audiences clapped. Some cried. She watched it play on a screen in front of her, hearing it as though it belonged to someone else. Her fame exploded beyond the military world. Schools sent her letters. Politicians quoted her in speeches. A senator even introduced a bill named the Hawley Act, designed to increase female representation in combat units. But for Hawley, the noise only made the silence louder. At night, she couldn't sleep. The dreams came in fragments, the flash of a scope, the crunch of gravel, the boy again. Always the boy. She'd wake with her heart pounding, her hands clenched around nothing. One morning, she went for a run through the park near her apartment. The city was calm, the world normal. People jogged, dogs barked, kids laughed. But every time a car backfired, her body tensed. A little girl spotted her and ran up, breathless. "Are you the soldier lady?" Hawley froze. "What?" "My teacher showed us your video. You said, 'I've got them.' You were so brave." The girl hugged her before she could react. Then she was gone, skipping back to her parents. Hawley stood there a long time, her throat tight. Bravery, that's what they called it. But the truth was more complicated. On that ridge, she hadn't felt brave, only responsible. Responsible for Jenkins, for the SEALs, for every life and every bullet. When she got home, she found an envelope taped to her door. No return address. Inside was a photo, the same one from the news, of her on the ridge, and a note scrawled in careful handwriting. "You took my brother's life that day. I hope the medal helps you sleep." Her hands shook as she read it. That night, she poured herself a glass of whiskey and sat on the floor, staring at the photograph. The boy's face flashed in her memory again, younger this time, eyes wide with fear. "Was it you?" She whispered. "Were you his brother?" The silence answered back. The return to the ridge 2 months later, the Army arranged a documentary shoot, a follow-up piece showing where it all happened. Command said it would honor those who'd served under her call. Hawley resisted, but in the end, she agreed. Maybe, she thought, she could find some closure. When the helicopter touched down on the same barren ridge, the place looked smaller than she remembered. The burned rocks were still blackened. Fragments of brass still glittered in the dirt. She walked to the spot where she'd lain, her boot crunching over the sand. For a moment, she knelt, not to pose for the cameras, but because her legs gave out. Jenkins stayed back, giving her space. The crew was setting up drones and lenses, but the wind drowned them out. Hawley pressed her palm against the earth, feeling the vibration of memory under her skin. "You ever think it's strange," she said softly, "that the world remembers the voice, but not the echo?" Jenkins frowned. "What do you mean?" I said, "I've got them." Everyone heard that part, but no one remembers what came next. He hesitated. What came next? Her voice was barely a whisper. The silence. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The cameraman called out, "Sergeant Hall, can you look up for the shot?" She didn't move at first. Then, slowly, she lifted her head, not toward the camera, but toward the horizon where the mountains met the sky. There, the wind howled softly through the valley, the same sound she'd heard that night. And in it, for just a second, she swore she heard something else. A voice, faint but familiar. Not a boy's, her own. "Hold the line." She closed her eyes, exhaled, and for the first time in months, let the memory pass through her instead of fighting it. When she opened her eyes again, The sun was breaking over the ridge, spilling gold light across the broken ground. And for the first time since that day, Rayleigh Halley didn't feel like the voice from the ridge. She just felt human again. 3 weeks after returning from Afghanistan, the story broke. It started as a rumor, a journalist claiming the Pentagon had exaggerated the events at al-Rashir Ridge. They questioned how a single sniper could have neutralized multiple threats with such precision, and whether command had staged details to boost morale and recruitment. By the second day, it was a headline. Hero or myth? Inside the mystery of the female sniper known as the Voice from the Ridge, Halley saw the article before sunrise. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Calls from military press, emails from strangers, texts from commanders urging her to stay calm and let the department handle it. But the damage was done. Reporters crowded outside her apartment. Commentators debated her on national television. Some called her a hero. Others called her propaganda. A senator even went on air to say, "If Sergeant Hale's story is embellished, the American people deserve to know." I didn't answer calls. She didn't leave her apartment. She barely ate. Jenkins stopped by one evening, finding her sitting in the dark, her TV flickering with news segments about her own life. "You're letting them eat you alive," he said. She looked up, her eyes hollow. "They made me a story, Jake. Now they're tearing it apart." He dropped his keys on the table and sat beside her. "You didn't lie." "I didn't have to," she said quietly. "They just filled in the blanks." Jenkins leaned forward, his voice low. "Then tell the truth. All of it. The way it really happened." Her hands trembled. "You think they'll want the truth? The truth isn't glorious. It's ugly. It's a 19-year-old bleeding out while I tried to call in a medevac that never came. It's shooting a boy who looked more scared than dangerous." Jenkins didn't speak. He didn't need to. Outside, the press shouted her name again. Inside, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. The summons 2 days later. A formal letter arrived. "You are requested to appear before the Congressional Oversight Committee regarding your conduct during the al-Rashir engagement." The Pentagon wanted to clarify her testimony. In reality, it was damage control. When Halley arrived at the Capitol, the marble corridors echoed with footsteps and whispers. The committee room was packed. Journalists, photographers, and politicians, all waiting to witness the fall or vindication of America's female sniper. The chairman, Senator Douglas, greeted her coldly. "Sergeant Halley, thank you for appearing today. We have questions about the authenticity of your actions at al-Rashir Ridge." Hale's lawyer sat beside her, whispering, "Stay calm. Keep your answers short." But when Douglas played the radio recording, her voice calling out from the ridge, followed by explosions, something in her snapped. He paused the audio. "Did you kill 12 combatants yourself, as the official report suggests?" Hale's voice was steady, but her hands clenched under the table. "No, sir." A ripple ran through the room. Cameras clicked furiously. Douglas leaned forward. "Then the report is false?" "The report is incomplete," she said. "I fired 6 confirmed shots. The rest was crossfire from Jenkins' team and the SEALs moving uphill." "So the story that made you a national hero," she interrupted, her tone sharp, "was built by people who weren't there." The senator frowned. "Are you saying the Department of Defense fabricated details for publicity?" Halley hesitated. Every instinct screamed to stay silent, to protect her career, her brothers in arms. But she remembered Jenkins' words, "Tell the truth." So she did. "I'm saying war isn't a movie," she said. "What happened that night wasn't glory, it was survival. We fought for each other, not headlines. But after the mission, someone turned it into a legend. They gave it a name. The voice from the ridge. I became a product. And the truth got buried under applause. The room fell silent. Douglas leaned back, eyes narrowing. Do you regret what you did? Halle looked straight at him. I regret what they did with it. The storm after the storm. By evening, the clip of her testimony went viral. Some hailed her as brave for speaking out. Others accused her of dishonoring the uniform. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #RidgeTruth and #CancelHall trended simultaneously. The Army's Public Affairs Office issued a statement praising her honesty and continued commitment to service. But the damage to her public image was irreversible. Still, for the first time in months, Halle felt lighter. The burden of perfection had finally cracked. She received hundreds of messages, some hateful, some grateful. One stood out. You don't owe them a legend. You owe yourself peace. A friend from another ridge. She didn't know who it was, but it brought tears to her eyes. The visit a week later, Halle visited the family of Sergeant Owens, one of the men killed that night. They lived in a small town in Kentucky, their farmhouse draped with a faded American flag. Owens' mother met her at the door, eyes wet but kind. You were with my boy when it happened? Halle nodded. Yes, ma'am. He was brave. He saved lives. The woman smiled faintly. He always said he wanted to make a difference. They sat together for hours, talking quietly. No cameras. No ceremony. Just shared pain. Before leaving, Halle handed her a folded flag, Owen's service flag. He told me once he was afraid he'd be forgotten, Halle said softly. I wanted you to know you won't be. Owen's mother touched her hand. And you, dear, don't let them turn you into something you're not. You've done enough. Halle drove away with tears blurring her vision. The reckoning that night, she stood in her apartment again, staring at her reflection. The medals glinted faintly in the dim light. One by one, she unpinned them. She placed them in a wooden box, the same one that had carried her father's medals decades ago, and slid it under the bed. The uniform came off next, folded neatly. For the first time, she saw herself not as Sergeant Hall, but as Riley. Just Riley. A person, not a symbol. When she opened the window, the night breeze felt different. Clean, real. Her phone buzzed again, this time from Jenkins. Jenkins, heard what you said in there. Proud of you. Halle, they'll bury me for it. Jenkins, maybe, but you'll sleep tonight. She smiled for the first time in weeks. Yeah, she whispered. Maybe I will. Then, without ceremony or audience, she turned off the TV, silencing the noise, the narratives, the myth. For the first time since Al-Rashir Ridge, there was peace in the quiet. The first morning after the congressional hearing, Riley Halle woke to silence, real silence, unbroken by helicopters, gunfire, or radio chatter. For the first time in months, she didn't check her phone immediately. She didn't reach for the news. She didn't listen for someone calling out her name. She simply sat on the edge of her bed and let the calm wash over her. Jenkins had left early for a meeting with the Army press office. She could hear him moving through the apartment as she stretched, still stiff from weeks of tension and travel. Outside, the city hummed with life. Normal life. For the first time, Riley felt she could breathe without flinching. Her reflection in the window showed a young woman hardened by war, shaped by survival, and scarred by the weight of myth. But there was something new, a quiet clarity, a recognition that she was not just a symbol. She was Riley Halle. A new mission by noon, she received an invitation to speak at a veterans outreach program. She had expected public ceremonies, press conferences, and more cameras, more narrative control. But this was different. The organizers wanted someone who had seen the reality of combat, Someone who could talk about the mental toll, the resilience, and the truth behind the headlines. Hale hesitated at first. Speaking publicly still felt dangerous. She had learned that her words carried power, for good or for scrutiny, and she didn't want to be used again. But something in the invitation felt genuine. This wasn't about fame. This was about helping others. She accepted. The room was small, a modest hall lined with chairs, photographs of past conflicts, and flags from various branches of the military. Veterans, young cadets, and family members filled the seats. No cameras. No reporters. Just faces waiting. She spoke slowly, carefully, recounting her story. Not the myth, not the legend, but the truth. The fear, the responsibility, the calculation, the weight of taking lives to save others. I didn't do anything heroic, she said. I did what was necessary. The SEALs survived because we all did our jobs, because we covered each other. Not because I'm a hero. Heroes don't exist in war. People survive, and they carry the memory of others forward. Some listeners nodded. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Hale realized, finally, that her voice had power not because it made her famous, but because it could help people process their own experiences. When she finished, a young woman approached her quietly. "Sergeant Hale," she said, voice shaking. "I want to be a sniper like you. I think I wanted to be brave like you. But now I realize bravery isn't always about being first or loud. Sometimes it's about being honest." Riley smiled faintly. "You'll find your own way. Being honest is brave enough." The ridge in memory weeks later, Hale returned to a remote location, a secluded range outside the city, to clear her mind. She unpacked her rifle carefully, checking every part, feeling the weight and precision she had come to trust. She raised her scope toward the horizon, imagining the mountains of Al-Rashir. For a moment, the wind carried her back, the smoke, the dust, the distant voices calling out in chaos. Then she exhaled, letting it go. She wasn't there anymore. Her hand lingered on the stock, memories of the ridge etched into every contour. But this time, there was no fear, no responsibility, only respect for those who had fought beside her, for those who had fallen, and for the lessons she carried forward. Unexpected reunion that evening. As she packed up, a familiar figure approached Jenkins. His grin was tired, but real. "You ready?" he asked. "For what?" He gestured toward the city skyline. "To live. To start the next chapter. No cameras, no headlines, just you moving forward." She considered it. She had spent months running from fame, from scrutiny, from her own thoughts. But he was right. The world would always know her as the legend. But Riley Hale could still exist beyond the myth. She slung her rifle over her shoulder. "Yeah," she said softly. "I'm ready." They walked back together through the fading light, the city alive around them, carrying both ordinary life and extraordinary memory. A letter arrives. A week later, Hale received a letter, handwritten, thick, with a simple postmark. She opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing of a ridge, small figures moving along the rocks, and words in neat handwriting. "You saved my brother. You didn't kill him, but you held the line when he couldn't. Thank you. I want to be brave like you, not for fame, but for truth." No signature. No return address. Just a drawing, a memory, and gratitude. Riley held it close. For the first time, she realized that her actions had ripple effects far beyond the ridge, beyond the medals, beyond the media. Lives were touched, quietly, profoundly, permanently. She pinned the letter above her desk, a reminder not of her legend, but of the impact of her honesty, courage, and persistence. The legacy of the voice, Months later, Riley Holley was invited to speak at a military academy. The lecture hall was packed, cadets and officers waiting for insights from someone who had seen it all. She stood before them, quiet, commanding attention without raising her voice. "I want you to remember this," she said. "Courage isn't about glory. Leadership isn't about headlines. The Ridge will never remember your name, but the people you protect will. That's what matters. That's the voice that counts, not mine, not anyone else's. The voice of responsibility, of humanity, and of truth." The cadets listened, rapt. Some took notes. Some nodded slowly. Afterward, one young officer approached her. "Sergeant Holley, how did you stay human after all of that?" She smiled faintly. "By remembering the cost. By speaking the truth. And by letting myself breathe again." As she stepped outside, the sun was rising over the campus. The morning light reflected on the flags, the polished windows, the quiet streets. She looked up, and for a moment, imagined the Ridge one last time. The wind, the smoke, the echoes of her own voice. "I've got them." Not as a legend, not as a hero, but as Riley Holley. And with that, she walked forward into a new day, leaving the Ridge behind, but carrying its lessons forever. The voice from the Ridge was no longer just a sound on the radio. It was the courage to face reality, the wisdom to honor truth, and the strength to survive, not for fame, not for glory, but for life itself.